everyone. Today we're talking about why it's so important to practice on a regular basis throughout the week instead of in sporadic segments or just 1 or 2 days of the week. So today I'm going to go through a couple points to illustrate why I think this makes such a big difference in how successful your practice routine is. And I'm also going to give you some tips for how to make that practice routine a reality if you are struggling with practicing on a daily basis. So here we go. So the first point has to do with this idea of muscle memory. And people talk about muscle memory in a lot of different ways. It can sometimes be painted as like this mystical thing that happens where you have little brains in your fingers or in your vocal cords and they have their own separate memory system and it just kind of works independently from your actual brain. And this is not really what's happening. So when we talk about muscle memory, what we're actually talking about is your brain's ability to take tasks that you do on a regular basis and allow you to kind of do them on autopilot. So it's the idea that as we do something over and over and over again, it basically gets easier and easier, and you have to use less brain power in order to achieve what you're trying to do. So a good way to think about this is to think back to learning how to ride a bike, or if you're a little bit older, learning how to drive a car. So when you first start that process of learning to ride a bike or drive a car, you're basically firing on all cylinders, right? You are laser focused. You are putting everything you have into succeeding and not crashing, focusing on each minute task that you can do to make sure that you are learning how to achieve your goals successfully. And if you notice, over time, it's not always like that. You don't have to be quite so laser focused. Once you know how to ride a bike and that's comfortable for you, you can just kind of relax and have fun because your body knows what to do, right? You don't have to worry quite as much about crashing or about falling off or losing your balance or any of those things because you kind of can do it on autopilot now. It's very similar with driving a car, right? Once you really start to get in the zone, sometimes to the point where it's scary, you can look up and be like, how did I get here? Huh, that looks new. But you basically don't have to think quite so hard about all of the different tasks you have to do in order to operate the vehicle. It's very similar when we're learning a musical instrument. We're applying that same idea of taking a task and turning it into something you can do kind of automatically to your music education. When you are practicing regularly and you're in a regular routine and you are getting that daily practice time, your brain is going to remember what to do a lot faster and a lot easier. It's actually like this magical feeling when after a few days of working on a certain passage, you realize, oh, this is kind of easy. Like I just kind of did that without really having to think about it. Cool, okay, what's next? So it simultaneously improves your growth and speeds up that process and also encourages you to keep going because you can see, oh wow, okay, this is getting easier. I am getting better. And all that you're doing is making sure that you're practicing on a regular basis to make that happen. The second point has to do a little bit more with how valuable our practice minutes actually are. Now, if you are studying an instrument, chances are you have had the experience of a busy week with not a lot of practice and getting to the day of your lesson and kind of panicking a little bit because you don't want to show up having made no progress for the course of the week, and yet the week has already gone by. And so you kind of do this frantic practice marathon session, right? Where you sit down and you just go through everything for like 30 minutes, an hour, even more than that. And then you show up to the lesson and you do even more because you're in the lesson now. And you kind of end that just feeling totally burned out and exhausted, and you don't want to practice again for like another 5 days. Unfortunately, this kind of can be a cycle that perpetuates itself, as you can see. But first of all, I just want to say that it is very admirable if you have done this to have the intention of wanting to continue to move forward with your craft, even if the week gets away from you. However, please don't try and pass it off as the fact that you've been practicing all week, because guess what? I have definitely done that myself, and I'm willing to bet that other teachers have done that in the past too. So I promise you, we can recognize the signs. We probably know what happened. So it's better to just be upfront and own that and give us all the information there so that we can just move forward with your time and based on what you were able to do. So the bigger point here is kind of a dirty little secret about practicing your instrument. And that is that the number of minutes you spend practicing a week actually is not that important. There are a lot of factors that determine whether your practice is actually successful and valuable and moving you in the right direction. And the number of minutes you spend on practicing each week is actually pretty low on the list. So to illustrate this, I'm going to give you an example. And we're going to look at two students, and they're going to go through the same number of practice minutes a week, but in very different ways. So, okay, let's say the goal is 90 minutes of practice a week. Now that's a very good starting goal. If you are just starting out learning an instrument, 90 minutes a week is an excellent place to start for your practice time. Now student A is going to say, okay, I need to practice 90 minutes a week. I'm going to do that all in one day because that'll work best for me with my schedule. I'll just do one 90-minute session and then I will do nothing for the next 6 days, okay? So one day, all 90 minutes, and then 6 days of nothing. Now student B looks at that and says, okay, I'll do 90 minutes a week, but I'm going to do 15 minutes a day for the first 6 days. And then on day 7, I'll take a break. That'll be my day off. So student B is doing 6 days of practice, right? Only 15 minutes a day, and then 1 day of nothing, okay? Same amount of time, but spread out very differently over the week. Now for student A, here's what that practice probably looks like. They get to their practice day, and they go to practice for the whole 90 minutes, just all at once. Here we go, let's do it. Well, they buckle down and realize that they really don't remember much of what they had from a week ago because they spent the last 6 days not working on anything. So a lot of that 90 minutes is going to get eaten up just by reviewing and trying to remember what's happening and what they were supposed to do and kind of catching up before they can move forward. By the time they get to the end of the 90 minutes, number one, they're going to be exhausted because they've had to be constantly thinking very hard this whole time. That's very draining. And number two, they are going to not want to practice again for a very long time, okay? Which is fine because in their case, they are intentionally taking the next 6 days off. However, they are also losing all the benefit of building that muscle memory because they're going to spend 6 days forgetting what they just worked really hard to do in 1 day of 90 minutes of practice. So it really is counterproductive. You're working very hard basically just to tread water. You're losing out on all of the benefits that come from daily practice. So it's not going to ever feel easier. It's not going to ever feel like you're really making much progress. You're always kind of doing the same thing over and over. And you always have to work really hard to not really be excited about it and feel like you're going somewhere, which doesn't really sound very fun to me. If that sounds like your cup of tea, then I guess you can stop watching. But if not, then let's take a look at student B. So student B, remember, was going to do 15 minutes a day for 6 days and then have 1 day off where they didn't do anything. Still adds up to 90 minutes, but it's very spread out. And come on, we all have 15 minutes a day. It's very doable for a starting point. And here's what's going to happen when student B practices. They're going to sit down for their first day and do 15 minutes and get to the end of the 15 minutes and go, oh, that wasn't so bad. Cool, all right, off to do something else. But the next day, they're going to come back and they're going to start going through all of their steps in their practice again. And it's probably going to feel a little bit easier. And they're going to remember more because they just did it yesterday. And then, before you know it, boom, that 15 minutes is up. So off you go, do something else. Well, day 3, day 4, day 5, you're really going to start to notice kind of this magic effect of things feeling really easy all of a sudden and not taking as much thought and as much effort to do successfully because you're doing it every single day, right? You're building that muscle memory and you don't have to spend any of your practice time really on review, right? You're immediately picking up where you left off from the day before and moving forward. So you're going to be much more excited to continue practicing every day because it feels like every day you get a little bit farther along, and you're actually going to be progressing, right? You're going to be making more progress on a daily basis and continuing to move forward much faster and much better than if you were doing it like student A and doing all your practice at one time in just one day of the week. What can we take away from this? Well, again, unless student A sounds like where you want to be, it's gonna be much better for you in your music education to try and practice as many days of the week as possible, ideally 6 to 7. Now again, you don't have to start with doing an hour a day, 7 days a week. Instead, you want to make sure that you're establishing the daily habit. This is the crucial part, and it's usually the hardest part, right? The hardest part for most of us is either just remembering to do it or making sure that we're not missing days, right? So I'm going to give you a couple tips to help you establish this habit, especially if you've tried to practice every day and you just are feeling like it's not going anywhere, it's not working, and it's just really difficult for you to do. So the first tip here is to break it down into manageable pieces. And again, I'm talking about that 15 minutes a day. Great place to start if you are just starting out learning your instrument. But even if you're more intermediate, if you are really having a hard time with this idea, break it down. So say that you right now practice maybe an hour or an hour and a half at a time and you love it and it's great, awesome, but you're really only good about doing that 1 or 2 days a week. Remember, total minutes of practice a week is not the biggest factor in whether you're really having successful practice sessions. So even if you are a little bit farther along in your music study, I would highly recommend, if you are struggling with daily practice, break it down and just try 15 minutes a day. Again, we all have 15 minutes a day. So start small with it, because then once you've established that habit, you can start building up your time from there. So let's say you're successful with 15 minutes a day for 3 weeks, okay? Week 4, do 20 minutes a day. It's not that much of an increase. It's only another 5 minutes a day. And by this point, you're so used to doing your daily time, it really doesn't even feel much different. Then week 5, do 25 minutes. Week 6, up it to 30, until you reach your goal for how many minutes a week you want to be practicing, or the recommendation of your teacher. If your teacher is saying, look, you really should be doing like an hour a day, then that's a great way to work yourself up to that hour a day and actually be able to sustain the habit. Again, it's about the habit, right? If you are successful with it just sporadically, then your progress is going to feel sporadic. So do yourself the favor, break it down into smaller practice sessions to allow yourself to establish that daily habit, and then build your time back up from there. All right, so the second tip is to schedule your practice time. Anything that is important to us to make time for usually needs to end up on our calendars, or it's not going to happen, right? Anytime we set goals for ourselves, if we don't block out specific time for it, for many of us, it just never materializes. And it's not that we didn't want to make time for it, it's just that things come up and life happens and other stuff gets in the way, or just takes up that time without us realizing it. So, you know, if you are wanting to arrange a play date, what do? You schedule it. If you want to make plans for dinner or to go to a movie or something, what do? You schedule it on the calendar. You block out specific time for that thing to happen because it's important. So you're going to make sure that it happens and has a home on your calendar. Do this with your practice time. Okay, it doesn't have to be at the same time every single day. For some people, that just doesn't work with their calendars. But do it when it works in your schedule. Actually put it on the calendar. Write it out and allot a specific block of time for your practice to help you make sure that it happens. The next tip is kind of tied into the last one, and that is to set an alarm or a reminder for when your practice time should start. Now, again, if it's on your calendar, you're probably already going in this direction, but sometimes it can actually just be really helpful for us to have some kind of stimulus to go, oh, right, okay, time to practice. We're not trying to be all Pavlov's dogs about this here, but it does actually help for some of us to hear something that says, oh, okay, it's time for me to do my practice. It's a little bit harder to ignore, right? Sometimes we can put something on the calendar and then we go, oh, look, there it is. And then we get distracted and go off over here and do something else. And then we're like, oh, 3 hours later, I never practiced. Setting that alarm and having something that actually triggers for you, now it's my practice time, that can also be very helpful for some people, just to make sure that you are aware that it is time to practice and to help you put in the effort to sit down and actually do it. Okay, and the last tip is to actually break up your practice time. Now, this sounds kind of basic, but it actually can be very helpful for a variety of different reasons. And what I mean by this is just instead of sitting down to practice for, say, 30 minutes at a time, from 3 to 3:30, that's when you're practicing your 30 minutes. Instead of that, break it up into smaller practice sessions throughout the day. So if you do 15 minutes in the morning after breakfast, then you're good on your 15 minutes there, and then say you do your other 15 minutes when you get home from school or right before you eat dinner. You can have flexibility with whatever those blocks of time are that work for you, but it can actually be helpful in some cases to not try and power your way through a giant stretch of practice time and to do several blocks of smaller time throughout the day. So places this might help. If you have trouble focusing on a task for long stretches of time, this could be for you. So say you just do not like to sit still for more than 10 or 15 minutes. Well, only practice for 10 or 15 minutes. Again, how you are focused on your practice and how you are mentally engaged is going to play a much bigger role in the success of your practice time than the actual duration. Okay, remember again, number of minutes, pretty low down on that list of important factors. So if you are having trouble and you get to, minute 20 of your practice and you're just really struggling and you're distracted and it's not really quality practice time, then ditch it. Do it later in the day when you've had a chance to walk away for a couple hours and you can come back fresh and do the rest of your practice time in a separate session. Another way this might help is if you really are just pressed for time. Let's say you have a longer practice goal per day. Let's say you're trying to do 45 minutes or an hour each day, but you really don't have that large of a chunk of time in your schedule to carve out for your practice all at once. Now, this could happen for a variety of reasons, but for many of us, that is kind of the reality. In that case, this actually makes your daily practice goal of the number of minutes you want to do possible. So again, do half your practice time at one point in the day when you have time for it, and the other half of your practice time later. And you can even take this further and do 3 different practice sessions in the day. So again, if we're looking at just that 15-minute increment, let's say you're trying to do 45 minutes a day. You can do 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at lunch, and 15 minutes in the evening. It's totally adjustable with your schedule. And again, we can all kind of pull 15 minutes from our day in a couple places. So it's really much more attainable than a giant practice session for a lot of people. And one other place this might help is if you just have kind of a hard time with physical limitations in your practice. So again, if you are really wanting to make sure you can practice upwards of an hour a day, for example, but you have trouble sitting still for that long, if you maybe get stiff after sitting for a certain amount of time, or if you are struggling with arthritis in your fingers, or even just building up stamina vocally, things like that, well, then it can be really much more productive for you to break up your time throughout the day and not try and power through again when you're kind of just feeling miserable and tired and just wanting to be done the last however many minutes of your practice time. If you're hitting a wall in your practice, whether it's a mental wall or a physical one or even an emotional one, sometimes if we're really having a hard time with something and struggling, that can be an emotional issue. It is often just better to walk away and come back to it when we've had a chance to kind of group, and we're mentally fresh, and we're a little bit more emotionally secure, and maybe had a chance to stretch physically. This allows you to reset and come back and really have a successful second half of your practice time. And still commit the same number of minutes, but really maximize the effect and the results that you're getting from your time. So I hope that this has been helpful and that you are maybe encouraged to start trying to carve out that daily practice habit. I hope you can see it is just so much better for your musical growth overall if you are able to do a daily practice routine. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.